Hi, this is Austin with Sprint 8. So, first things first, I'll jump right in. So, this is all the same so far, but I changed the viewport, so I think this definitely looks better than what I had at least, because now things are separated. You can actually kind of see the walls a little better. The things I changed from last time is that now pausing will work correctly on any level. So I'm still here. And that would also work if I save and load from file. Okay, so I had to cut because one of my features didn't actually work as advertised, but it's fixed now, so I'm going to try that again. I'm going to shoot a bullet. So there it goes. And it despawns right about there. So now I'll shoot another bullet. I'll wait for it to get close to that point. I will pause, and then I will unpause, and it still despawns right around where it's supposed to. So it can now, the storeable objects can now recreate their alarms. So prior, it would just reset and keep going, but now it doesn't. And so another thing I changed is I add more enemies to this level. You can also see that the boss, the enemy count has been replaced by the boss health bar because of the state machine I use for the enemy spawner. And hopefully I'll actually be able to do it, but once I kill this guy, it'll end regardless of how many enemies are left in the stage. So, okay, so I just about got him now, but the point that I'm trying to make is that you can see once he dies, I go to the win screen even though there were some enemies left. So I'll look into that as well. So, first thing I want to note is, I guess I can show off the, I was editing this, but the base scene load recreate function, you can see that it now passes in the alarm as well to the enemy bullet factory, and that value defaults to 0, and if it's 0, then the enemy bullet just uses the normal alarm. I can show that as well. And the regular bullet factory is the same, so I'm not going to show both of them, but I will look at the enemy bullet factory here. You can see that it passes in a default of 0, creates the enemy bullet, and then here, if that value is not 0, then initialize it with that alarm. Otherwise, it just initializes it with the normal alarm, and I will go to the enemy bullet and initialize. So I pass in the timer, and if it's not there, I just use the default timer, which is set to 4, which is what it used to be, and I guess still is, and that just uses the normal amount of time for the bullet. So that's how that works. And the other objects, I'll use similar processes for their alarms. So that's, I think, all I need to show with those. The thing that I was originally planning to show was just the fact that I've got the terrain iterator working as designed. So there's the AABB, the rectangle, X and Z offset, set the AABB in the rectangle. I have the increment, it just goes up, and if it's past the point but not at the end, that's what this part represents, it's the end value, then it goes back to 0, increments the Z offset, and then returns the rectangle. So that has the begin and end function, it has the length along the X and Z axes, the start point, begin and end, it can return its terrain if that's needed. So it sets its terrain, it gets the values from the highlight cell, which don't actually highlight the cell anymore. I guess it still does, but the main purpose is to return the actual cell, the cell integer, and then uses those to calculate the length along the X and Z axes, and those are just short little one-line functions in the terrain object class. Shown here. And a lot of this code used to just be in the intersect. This all still is here because to like color it in, but the actual terrain collision command actually has the actual work in it now. So game object commands collision testing. collision terrain command. So you can see here that it calls the intersect on the get cell from the AABB and then the volume, and uses that to determine whether or not it should call the collision terrain. So and there's a terrain iterator, begin, end, and again I use that to get the AABB data and not the actual cell data, because like you said, that would defeat the point. So all of that is packed into the iterator, so that should all be okay. So this is the storeable itself is the same, but I now have the alarm array in the storage node that it uses to store the 3 alarms. So since I didn't actually show any of them, I guess I can look quickly into one of them. I'll go with the enemy. And yeah, here in the store, it gets the check alarm, which is a new function I added that just returns the value of the current alarm. I also added this function, but I don't think I ever actually ended up using it, so I'm going to take that back out. It would just reset the alarm if you had. It would give the alarm a new time if it hadn't already been submitted, meant to be called at the beginning of the submit entry. But I found a way around that anyway, so I'll probably take that out. But then the check alarm, all it does is determine whether it's pending or currently registered. If it's pending, then it just returns the reg command set time, or the time that's already in the command. Otherwise, it goes into the alarm manager, gets the time by just doing a find. I could do like the quick find using storing a reference, but since I've already done that for like 4 other managers, I don't necessarily know that it warrants setting up again. So back to the storable manager. I now have a tag that designates what level you're storing, and there's a user-defined function related to that with the storable manager. So storable recreate scene. I'm just doing this with a series of if checks pretty much, and these really can be returned, so I'll actually do that now. But the idea is that I would just take whatever the tag is and use that to determine what scene to recreate. So it's not very difficult, and that tag is set at the beginning of the base right here. So still a very user-heavy interface, but a lot of the background details can be taken care of by the storable manager. So I also now have the option to unstore certain elements, although I no longer automatically store unstore, because there will be advantages to being able to only store an object on scene entry, for example, for the bullets, as opposed to the tanks, where you only want to submit their entry once and then never unstore them, because if they die, you still want that to overwrite when you reload the scene. Otherwise, the enemies will respawn. I know that was a problem that I was having. I think 2 sprints ago. And I talked about it then too. I think all that I really have left is to talk. Well, actually, first I should just say that should be everything for the pause and unpause and the save and load. So that should all be done now, like just completely. So I am going to move on to the particle manager next, and I've done like a tiny bit, like setting up .h files and then mapping out a couple of the functions, but I don't really have very much on that front, so it's gonna kind of be my final sprint objective, aside from cleaning everything up. And because of that, I was set behind by networking, which is why I'm where I am, and I'm going to cut some of the game features, like but I guess I can show off turret. So yeah, tank turret. I set it here. Set the matrices, and then call fire bullet on that, and that's what fires the bullet. So that's properly decoupled in preparation for me being able to rotate the turret separately. And I already did a check to make sure that the tank turret, when given a specific angle, it can actually shoot in a different direction. So if I use that as my current angle, we'll start without debugging, and I will shoot to the left now. There it is. So that works or it will work once I actually get around to programming the manual rotation, which I'll probably just have be the Q and E key. And then one last thing I forgot to mention was the enemy manager state machine. So you can see here that I am now using the state to check death. The state also draws the health bar. And speaking of the health bar, I moved all that onto the engine side. So I can just call the health bar function given a sprite, X and Y position, translation, and a counter, and I can automatically draw the health bar. So that I don't have to do on the user side anymore. Excuse me. So yeah, I can set the state here, draw a health bar, check death, and then I have the load sprite, draw a health bar, and check death, and the default sprite X, Y, and translation position, so I don't need to manually define those anymore. So you can see I just call the draw health bar function from the UI helper. I set my sprite here, return whether or not the count is equal to 0 for the base state. I still pass in both values so that those can do their checks, but this only uses the count value. And the boss state checks whether or not the first enemy in the array, which would be the boss, is at a null pointer, and if it is, the boss is dead, so the stage ends. So that's how that state works. And that, for real, should be everything.